Most men never fail at the beginning. They fail in the middle, at the exact point where success is forming, but not yet visible. Not when the path is unclear, but when the effort becomes repetitive, the reward is delayed, and the mind begins to whisper, "This is not working." That whisper sounds reasonable. It feels logical. It presents evidence. It reminds you of the time invested, the lack of visible results, the uncertainty ahead. And slowly, it convinces you that stopping is not failure, but a smart decision. That is how persistence dies, not through force, but through persuasion. You begin with energy, a decision that feels solid, a goal that carries emotion and urgency. The first steps feel natural. You act with confidence because the idea is still fresh, still exciting, still untouched by resistance. But excitement does not last. And when it fades, something else must take its place. This is where most men are unprepared. They expect motivation to carry them forward. They expect progress to feel rewarding. They expect effort to be met with immediate signs that they are moving in the right direction. But progress rarely announces itself early. It hides beneath repetition, beneath discomfort, beneath the quiet moments where nothing seems to change. And because it is hidden, it is often mistaken for absence. So doubt begins. You question the plan. You reconsider the goal. You look for alternatives that promise faster results, easier paths, less resistance. And in that search, you weaken your commitment to the path you chose. This is the turning point. Not when you stop, but when you begin to consider stopping. Because once that thought enters your mind and goes unchallenged, your actions begin to shift. You delay, you reduce effort, you allow small exceptions that slowly break your rhythm. Momentum weakens quietly. You don't quit in one moment, you drift. One missed action becomes two. Two becomes a pattern. And before you realize it, the consistency that once felt strong has disappeared, and with it, the progress you were building. Then comes the reset, a new beginning, a fresh attempt, a renewed promise that this time will be different. But without understanding what caused the break, the pattern repeats, again and again and again. This is not lack of discipline. It is lack of persistence. Persistence is not intensity. It is not working harder for a short period. It is the ability to continue when intensity fades, to remain in motion when nothing external is encouraging you to do so. It is quiet. It is repetitive. It is often unnoticed. And that is why it is rare. Let me ask you something directly. Have you ever stopped something, not because it was impossible, but because it stopped feeling rewarding, because the effort felt heavy, and the results felt distant, and your mind offered you a more comfortable alternative, and that moment defines everything? Because in that moment, you are closer than you realize. Resistance does not appear randomly. It appears at the edge of growth. The moment when your current level is about to expand into something greater. And because that expansion requires effort, your mind resists. It seeks comfort. It looks for escape. And if you follow it, you retreat. But if you recognize it, you advance. This is the difference between those who achieve and those who repeat. Those who achieve do not avoid resistance. They expect it. They understand that the feeling of wanting to stop is not a signal to quit. It is a signal that they are approaching something valuable, something just beyond their current limit. And they continue, not because they feel strong, but because they have decided to remain. Decision strengthens persistence. Without decision, persistence collapses under pressure. Because when the mind begins to negotiate, it needs a fixed point, a reason strong enough to override the discomfort of continuing. That reason must be chosen in advance, not in the moment of struggle, because in the moment of struggle, the mind will always choose the easier path. So persistence is not built in difficulty, it is built before it. In this lesson, you will discover what truly happens in the middle phase, the phase where most quit. You will learn how to recognize the moment your mind begins to persuade you to stop and how to respond without hesitation. You will understand how to build a form of persistence that does not depend on emotion, does not weaken under pressure, and does not collapse when results are delayed. But before any method works, you must accept this. You are not failing because you lack ability. You are stopping because you are misinterpreting the struggle. And the moment you see struggle, not as a warning, but as a signal, you will realize something most men never do. That the point where you feel like quitting is the point where success is closest. Part 1. Persistence is the test that comes after the promise. Many men admire great beginning because the beginning is pleasant to behold. A new purpose brings light to the face, speed to the step, and a certain boldness to the voice. In those first days, a man feels almost certain that he shall conquer, because he has not yet met the tax collector of achievement. He has not yet paid the price demanded by time, repetition, monotony, and silence. That is why so many deceive themselves at the outset. They mistake excitement for strength. They mistake motion for endurance. They believe that because they began with force, they shall therefore finish with victory. Yet life is not won in the first burst of energy. It is won in the long stretch after applause has faded, after novelty has died, and after the senses report that nothing of consequence is happening. The weak man can begin. Nearly every man can begin when desire has been freshly stirred. But the man who rises above the ordinary is the one who continues. After beginning has lost its charm. He remains when the road grows plain, when the labor grows repetitive, and when the reward hides itself from the eye. There is no grand music in that hour. There is no parade. There is only decision, and then the obedience of action. Most men do not quit in an open, dramatic fashion. They do not stand before the world and declare surrender. They do something far more dangerous. They begin to listen. They listen to the whisper that comes dressed in reason. It tells them the effort is no longer wise. It tells them the timing is poor. It tells them they have given enough. It reminds them of the hours already spent, the progress not yet seen, and the comfort available if only they would step away. That whisper has robbed more men of fortune than open fear ever has. It does not shout. It persuades. It offers evidence. It borrows the voice of prudence. And because it sounds intelligent, many accept its counsel as truth. Thus they retreat not in shame, but in self-approval, believing they have made a sensible choice when in fact they have abandoned the very ground on which success was gathering itself. There is an old lesson I have repeated because the world needs it repeated. A man sought gold. He dug with faith, then with effort, then with growing weariness. He found signs enough to keep him moving until the work became difficult and the visible return uncertain. Then he stopped. He sold his machinery and walked away. Another man came, not with greater hope alone, but with better persistence and better judgment. He consulted one who understood the geology of the land. The verdict was simple. The first man had stopped 3 feet from gold. Consider that lesson well, for it is not about mining alone. It is about marriage, business, character, study, self-command, and every worthy enterprise under the sun. Men stop 3 feet from peace. They stop 3 feet from influence. They stop 3 feet from mastery over themselves. They stop 3 feet from the opening that would have justified all the labor that came before it. They judge too soon, withdraw too early, and then spend years calling bad fortune what was really weak persistence. The world rarely sees the hidden arithmetic of success. It sees only outcomes. It sees the man who endured and calls him fortunate. It sees the man who withdrew and calls him unlucky. But fortune often stands with the man who simply remained on the field long enough for the law of compensation to begin its work. Riches, leadership, and power do not merely go to the most clever. They often go to the man who outlasts the discouragement that empties the ranks around him. You must understand this with great clarity. Struggle is not always a warning. Very often it is evidence. It is evidence that the old self is being resisted. It is evidence that the aim is worthy enough to demand your full price. It is evidence that you have reached the portion of the road where many turn back. And because many turn back there, that stretch becomes the dividing line between the common and the uncommon. A man who persists begins to acquire a new appearance before he acquires a new result. Others notice it before he does. His speech becomes less feverish. His movements become less desperate. He no longer seeks immediate approval for every effort. He becomes steadier, more reliable, more contained. The world begins to sense that he is no longer ruled by every changing mood. Such a man draws trust because trust naturally gathers around visible constancy. The opposite is also true. The man who repeatedly begins and abandons becomes known even if no one speaks it plainly. He is regarded as promising but unstable, enthusiastic but unproven, full of plans but light in execution. He may possess ability, yet others hesitate to build with him, follow him, employ him, or depend upon him because they have seen him warm quickly and cool quickly. Character announces itself through continuity. Every worthy aim demands a price paid in advance. That is one of the oldest laws of achievement. The price is not always money. Often it is patience. Often it is humiliation. Often it is repetition without applause. Often it is labor performed in silence while less deserving men appear to move ahead. Those who cannot pay such a price attempt to bargain with life. They want harvest without season, strength without discipline, and victory without long obedience. Life does not honor such bargains. It rewards equivalent service. It rewards endurance joined to intelligent direction. It rewards the man who remains faithful to a just purpose after comfort has begun to plead for retreat. That is why persistence is not a small ornament of success. It is one of its central pillars. Without it, desire burns out, faith grows weak, planning is abandoned. Even talent rots from disuse when persistence is absent. There comes a moment in every serious undertaking when the labor ceases to flatter the ego. At first, a man feels noble merely for having begun. Later, he is stripped of that cheap reward. He must act without the pleasure of feeling exceptional. He must work when the effort feels ordinary. He must continue when the act no longer supports his vanity. That is the hour in which persistence becomes moral power. It teaches him to serve the aim rather than his own appetite for stimulation. The men the world remembers were not always the most gifted at the outset. Many of them were simply unwilling to stop where the majority became tired. Abraham Lincoln knew defeat, ridicule, and repeated disappointment. Yet he remained in the contest of life long enough for his character to harden into greatness. Thomas Edison met failure not once, but in long sequences, and treated each result not as a sentence against the aim, but as instruction toward the aim. Such men were not preserved by ease. They were forged by persistence under conditions that would have excused surrender. If you would grow rich in any form worthy of the name, you must cease interpreting delay as denial. Delay is often only the period in which your fitness is being tested. What if success were given instantly? Then weak men would wear crowns they could not hold. The delay itself has purpose. It separates wish from will. It separates appetite from readiness. It reveals whether your desire is merely emotional or truly organized around a definite commitment. Say to yourself, I remain faithful when the reward is hidden. Say to yourself, I do not judge the harvest while the seed is still beneath the ground. Say to yourself, the urge to stop is not my master. Say to yourself, I outlast discouragement, and I continue until the law of increase answers my effort. There is a dignity in persistence that cannot be imitated. It cannot be purchased by clever speech. It cannot be worn like a garment. It reveals itself slowly through repeated acts of refusal. Refusal to retreat. Refusal to interpret discomfort as disaster. Refusal to surrender a worthy aim because the middle stretch lacks visible sweetness. Men of this quality become difficult to defeat because defeat no longer possesses the power to define them. That is why the middle portion of every effort is so sacred. The beginning belongs partly to feeling. The end belongs partly to result, but the middle belongs to character. In the middle, you discover what governs you. If mood governs you, you will bend. If comfort governs you, you will negotiate. If opinion governs you, you will shrink. But if purpose governs you, then you will remain, and remaining will gradually become your power. Part 2. Persistence cannot stand long upon a weak desire. That is a truth too often overlooked by those who speak of discipline as if it were a cold mechanical force. A man continues because something within him has become more important than relief. When the purpose is faint, the obstacles seem enormous. When the purpose burns, the obstacles shrink to their proper size. Thus, the strength of persistence depends greatly upon the heat of desire from which it springs. Many men wish for success in the casual manner that a child wishes for pleasant weather. They admire the idea of riches, authority, freedom, or peace, but they do not desire these conditions with sufficient intensity to rearrange their habits around them. So long as desire remains shallow, persistence will remain fragile. The first hard season will scatter it. The first mocker will embarrass it. The first slow month will disprove it in the man's own mind. That is why definite purpose is indispensable. A man must know what he seeks, why he seeks it, and what he is willing to give in return. Without these three elements, persistence has no spine. It becomes a vague preference, a passing fancy, a sentiment that comes and goes with weather. Purpose hardens desire into direction. It gathers the mind from its scattered wanderings and fixes it upon a single worthy object. Consider Edwin C. Barnes. He did not merely wish to work with Edison, he decided he would do so. There is a vast difference between those two mental attitudes. Wishing leaves the door open for retreat. Decision closes the smaller roads and concentrates power upon one greater road. Barnes had neither wealth nor social advantage that would have impressed the world. What he possessed was that rarest of forms of capital, a mind unwilling to surrender its chosen claim. Had Barnes been like the average man, he would have interpreted delay as rejection. He would have taken a lesser arrangement than another, then perhaps spoken proudly of practicality while secretly mourning the burial of his chief desire. Instead, he held his mental picture until circumstance aligned with it. Opportunity often comes through an obscure side entrance, and only the persistent man remains near enough to recognize it when it arrives. There are thousands who lose not because they lacked a chance, but because they left the field before chance ripened. The human mind is impatient with incubation. It wants immediate visible proof. It wants signs before service has been fully rendered. Yet many of the greatest opportunities first appear in humble dress. The persistent man accepts the small doorway if it leads into the right house. The drifter rejects it because his pride wanted a golden gate. Dr. Frank Gonsalves gives another lesson of great value. He did not drift into his $1,000,000 aim. He seized it in thought before he possessed it, in fact. He reached the point where desire became so defined that action followed with certainty. From that hour, the object no longer belonged to the realm of vague longing. It became an assignment. Such a mental state changes the quality of persistence. The man no longer asks each day whether he should continue. He continues because the question has already been settled. This is where most men waste force. They reopen the case each morning. They debate again what was already decided yesterday. They negotiate again with the lower self. They ask whether the aim is still worthwhile, whether the path is still agreeable, whether perhaps another course might be easier. In this repeated trial, energy is consumed that should have been spent in execution. Indecision is one of the great thieves of persistence. Decision and persistence are twins in the house of achievement. Decision gives direction. Persistence gives duration. One without the other is crippled. A man may decide nobly and still fail if he does not continue. Another may continue busily and still fail if he has not clearly decided upon a worthy object. But when the two are joined, clear decision and durable persistence, the mind begins to gather a force that ordinary resistance cannot easily stop. Observe also what happens in the eyes of others when a man lives by fixed purpose. At first he may be ridiculed, then he may be watched. Then, if he remains, he begins to be respected. Men trust continuity. Employers trust it. Partners trust it. Families trust it. Communities trust it. The world may not immediately reward your purpose, but it studies it. It tests whether your seriousness is temporary. When enough time passes and you are still there, doors begin to open that are closed to the inconsistent. The great danger of changing aims too often is not merely lost time, it is loss of compound force. Every day directed toward one chief aim adds pressure in one direction. Thought, habit, relationship, knowledge, and opportunity begin to organize themselves around that aim. But when a man shifts course continually, he scatters this accumulating power. He is like one who digs 100 shallow wells and then complains that none produced water. The ordinary man often mistakes variety for progress. He believes that because he is busy with new ideas, he is advancing. But motion is not achievement. Restlessness is not enterprise. Constant redirection is often only concealed fear, the fear of staying long enough in one place for the truth to appear, either the truth that the plan must be improved or the truth that success lies just ahead. Persistent men endure long enough to discover which truth is present. Do not imagine that persistence belongs only to great industrial leaders and statesmen. It belongs equally to the clerk who improves himself nightly, the salesman who refines his service after rejection, the laborer who saves faithfully from each week's wages, the student who masters one subject with patience, the husband who rebuilds trust through steady conduct, and the soul who refuses to remain in inner poverty. The law is the same at every level. What continues with intelligent purpose gains force. Say to yourself, my purpose is definite and my steps obey it. Say to yourself, I do not reopen what I have already rightly decided. Say to yourself, I gather my power in one direction until resistance yields. Say to yourself, delay does not move me from my aim. There is a kind of dignity that begins to form in the man who remains loyal to one worthy object. He no longer envies every passing success. He no longer runs after each glittering possibility. He is spared much waste because he has ceased trying to live 100 lives at once. Such concentration deepens his thought, disciplines his appetite, and teaches him that greatness is more often the child of accumulation than of sudden miracle. The mind that persists under the government of definite purpose gains self-respect. And self-respect is no small matter. Without it, wealth is dangerous, influence is unstable, and ambition becomes feverish. But when a man knows he can remain faithful to a chosen task beyond the first wave of feeling, he begins to trust himself. From that trust comes authority. Others sense it, for authority is not loudness. It is the quiet force of a man who has proved to himself that he does not flee from his own commitments. Part 3. Persistence, if it is to endure long seasons, must draw nourishment from faith. No man can walk indefinitely by sight alone, because the greater part of valuable achievement remains invisible for long stretches of time. If the senses alone are allowed to judge the matter, discouragement soon takes command. The eye sees little. The ear hears criticism. The body feels fatigue. Under such witnesses, many men pronounce sentence against themselves long before the higher law has finished its work. Faith is not an ornament for the weak-minded. It is a practical force. It enables a man to continue acting toward a result before the result has made itself visible. Such action is not foolish when it is tied to a sound purpose, organized planning, and persistent effort. It is one of the great secrets by which the world is moved. Men of consequence have always possessed the faculty of acting as though the harvest were certain while they were still sowing. But faith does not grow well in neglected soil. It must be fed. It must be repeated. It must be fixed in language and impressed upon the subconscious mind until it becomes a living tendency of thought. That is the office of autosuggestion. A man either suggests power to himself or he suggests defeat. He either repeats his aim and strengthens it, or he repeats his fear and strengthens that. There is no neutral field in the mind for long. Observe the conduct of the average discouraged man. He says, perhaps quietly, perhaps with false humor, that the effort is useless. He repeats that times are bad, that others have advantages, that his own nature is weak, that success belongs to a different class of men. He may call these remarks honesty, but in truth, he is educating his subconscious mind toward surrender. Repeated words soaked in feeling do not disappear. They become inner instruction. Now consider the conduct of the man who understands the law. He speaks his chief aim aloud. He repeats his worthiness to achieve it. He reminds himself daily that temporary defeat is not final failure. He refuses to permit the tongue to serve the enemy of his purpose. This does not mean empty speech without service. It means that speech and service must work together. One directs the mind, the other proves the intention. Many fail not because adversity is too strong, but because inward speech is too weak. They allow the mind to become a meeting place for doubts, old humiliations, and borrowed fears. Then they wonder why persistence crumbles under pressure. You cannot persist nobly if you secretly preach defeat to yourself. You cannot remain steadfast outwardly while inwardly imagining collapse. The inner word is a builder. It either raises the house of endurance or tears down its supports. Think of the lesson found in the life of the boy born without ordinary hearing who later learned to enter the world of sound and speech through faith, suggestion, and relentless effort. What others called limitation became a field for the exercise of belief. Such a life proves that the line between the impossible and the achieved is often guarded not merely by labor, but by unwavering faith expressed repeatedly until the mind accepts no inferior verdict. There is another matter of the highest importance: the company a man keeps. Persistence is strengthened or weakened by association. One discouraged, mocking, cynical companion can undo much inner labor if permitted constant access to the mind. Men speak lightly of conversation, yet conversation is often suggestion in disguise. If you sit among drifters, you will hear the gospel of retreat. They will tell you why effort is vain, why standards are excessive, why caution should replace bold design, why the old life should be kept because the new one is not yet guaranteed. Guard your ears as carefully as you guard your purse. Many have lost fortunes first in thought through bad association, and only later, in fact, through weak action. The persistent man is not always rude, but he is selective. He does not submit the destiny of his purpose to the judgment of those who have never disciplined their own minds. He seeks alliance with faith, industry, and courage. Such companionship multiplies endurance. Others begin to notice this change. A man who has mastered his inner speech and disciplined his company becomes harder to unsettle. He listens more carefully. He answers criticism more slowly. He ceases rushing to defend every action. He seems anchored. That impression is not accidental. It is the outward sign of an inward government. Since he is less ruled by passing voices, he becomes more fitted to direct circumstances rather than bow before them. Many men pray for strength while continuing to rehearse weakness. They ask for courage while daily proclaiming their own inadequacy. They desire victory while entertaining defeat as a frequent guest. This contradiction confuses the mind. Harmony is required. The tongue, the imagination, and the daily act must agree. When they do, persistence grows naturally because the whole being has been organized in one direction. Say to yourself, "My mind serves my purpose and not my fear." Say to yourself, "I speak courage until courage becomes my habit." Say to yourself, "Temporary defeat cannot master a mind governed by faith." Say to yourself, "I choose companions who strengthen endurance and not surrender." Remember this always. Criticism has broken many men who might have conquered poverty, obscurity, and failure had they been deaf to opinion. The fear of being laughed at has ended more noble undertakings than the lack of capital. Yet criticism loses much of its poison when a man has educated himself to draw support from within. The crowd has always doubted what it did not understand. If the crowd's approval is made the measure of your persistence, your life will be governed by people whose own purposes are unfinished. Faith does not remove labor. It dignifies labor. It allows a man to work without constant evidence. It permits him to sow when fools call the ground barren. It steadies the hand when outward signs are poor. Joined with autosuggestion, it becomes one of the secret allies of persistence. It keeps the invisible future alive in the mind until persistent action has time to make it visible in the world. Part 4. Persistence must never be confused with blind stubbornness. There is a noble persistence and a foolish persistence. The noble form remains loyal to the aim while improving the method. The foolish form repeats the same error with pride and calls that strength. Intelligent persistence learns, adjusts, consults, and continues. It does not abandon the chief object because a plan has failed. It simply refines the plan and pays again in action. Temporary defeat is often the school in which persistence receives its intelligence. Without defeat, some men would remain careless and childish in their efforts. They would imagine that wishing is enough, that the first arrangement must succeed, or that the law of compensation owes them a reward merely because they desire one. Temporary defeat corrects these fantasies. It asks a stern question. Do you want the end enough to improve yourself for it? Henry Ford gave a splendid lesson in this matter when he held firmly to the construction of a motor that others around him declared impossible. Note well that persistence in such a case was not mere repetition without thought. It was the unyielding command that the result be found, joined to continued labor and continued experimentation until the method was discovered. That is intelligent persistence. The aim was fixed, but the road toward it was worked upon until success answered. Thomas Edison provides the same principle in another form. He did not worship failure, nor did he bow before it. He questioned it, learned from it, and returned to the task armed with fresh knowledge. The world often praises genius while forgetting the countless disciplined returns to labor that made genius fruitful. An idea without persistence is a spark in the wind. An idea joined to persistent experiment becomes invention, industry, and influence. King Gillette held to an idea many would have dismissed as too simple or too strange. Woolworth persisted with a form of merchandising that others might have scorned. Great departures are often received coldly at first because the world is accustomed to what already is. Therefore, the one who carries a new conception must often bear seasons of misunderstanding. If he expects universal approval at the beginning, he is not ready for leadership. Yet note this carefully. Each of these men had to do more than endure. They had to organize. They